What is up? And welcome to the second episode of the Bet Chicago Sports Podcast. I am Shane Jackson. I'm excited to be here. Back-to-back days. Episode 1 was yesterday. Did a bunch of season predictions, got ready for the season. Then we had a football game. So I'm very excited. Woke up a little bit more energy because we had football, but we have to wait a couple more days for more football, unfortunately. Fortunately for us, we'll have Sean Hammond, our Bears beat reporter, to talk all things Bears versus 49ers, basically to come with the conclusion, will the Bears cover +7? That's really the whole goal for this entire episode. We'll do an episode every Friday previewing the matchup, focus a lot on the Bears. Later in the episode, I'll get into the rest of my week 1 bets and talk a little about Thursday Night Football and what kind of stood out to me as well. But remember, this podcast is presented by Caesars Sportsbook. If you scan the QR code right now, right there in the bottom of your right screen, you can get your first bet through our partnership. Whether you lose, you get it all back, 100% of your stake. Whether you win or lose, you get rewarded up to 1,000 tier credits. Caesar Sportsbook giving that offer for up to $12.50 is the amount. So basically, if you're new to sports betting, take advantage. Take advantage of the promos and boost up that bankroll. I mean, it's a bet that you'll get your money back if you lose. So I think that's very exciting. You should do it. And if you haven't already, check out Bet Chicago Sports. It's at shawlocal.com/bet. Bunch of articles, bunch of content there talking about all things betting, catered really to the Chicago audience, but it can help new and experienced bettors. I highly recommend you check all that out. We broke down from a betting perspective a lot of things Bears related this week. But I'm very excited now to bring on Sean Hammond, our Bears beat reporter, because he knows a lot more than I do when it comes to the Bears. He's been in and out of the facilities every day this week, basically. Sean, how's it going?
Hey, Shane. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm happy to join. I'm tuning in from Hallis Hall at the moment, actually.
Yeah, let's start there then. I think it's important, whether you are a Bears fan or not, you need to know the information. Bettors as well, right? They need to know what's going on. Can you tell me maybe the latest injury news, latest news heading into the weekend that's relevant for Bears fans and anybody betting on this game?
Yeah, well, the big one, and this just came across now a little bit after 4 o'clock on Friday. George Kittle is questionable for the 49ers. He's been dealing with a groin injury, something that popped up just this week. So certainly something to keep an eye on there. The reports I saw said that he was not spotted at practice. So that's obviously not a good sign for them. If he's going to, I would think that probably means he's not going to be playing, but we don't really know. On the Bears side, Velus Jones Jr., the rookie receiver, he is questionable. He did not practice at all this week due to a hamstring injury, and he's kind of been in and out all of training camp. I would probably lean towards him not playing either, but I don't know that affects a whole lot for the Bears. They've kind of been without him a lot this preseason, so I think they've had some contingency plans in place. The other big news this week, at least on the Bears side, has been Lucas Patrick getting back in there. He, was brought here to be the starting center. He suffered a hand injury early on in training camp and missed about a month. We don't know where he's gonna play, if he's gonna play. He's got his hand wrapped up, taped up, and there's some questions about whether he can actually snap the ball. So we don't know if he's going to be coming in at center or guard, or if they're just going to give it a couple weeks and move ahead with the group that they've been using the last couple of preseason games.
No, that's very good to know. Very important information. I like that you mentioned maybe Kittle at the top there. That is the most notable injury update for the week for this matchup. I wrote about it again at Bet Chicago Sports, which you can find at shawlocal.com/bet. Basically a write-up explaining the difference, like how it impacts the betting lines. I think you'll see it impact the player prop market going into the weekend. But in terms of the actual spread, still 7-point. The Bears are a touchdown underdog, but you're starting to see the juice trend in their direction. So normally with the spread, each juice or the VIG is -110. That's a normal wager, right? Bears right now are -115 at Caesar Sportsbook at +7, whereas the 49ers are -105. So essentially, they're trying to stay at that number and entice you maybe to bet 49ers at -7. I wanted to kind of dive into completely this game and try to figure out if the Bears can cover. I also want to get into maybe big picture topics before we send you off here. Just kind of your expectations for the season, because I think there's a lot of different betting angles, both from the individual game and the season going into week 1.
Yeah, for sure.
So last year they played in a matchup in week 8. The Bears at the time were a 4.5-point underdog. They ended up losing that game by, I believe, 11 points. Is there anything you can take away from last year's meeting between the Bears and 49ers?
Yeah, it's always hard, especially in the NFL. These teams change so much from year to year. Obviously, the Bears coaching staff is completely different. If there's anything I take away from that game, it's that Deebo Samuel can change things in an instant. I mean, you go back and look at what he did in that game last year, that he made some big game-changing plays. And the Bears hung around a little bit early on in that game, but ultimately weren't able to sustain it. And now you look at the 49ers, they got Trey Lance coming in at quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo is still there, but he's taking that backup role. I think there's a lot of question marks about what this offense is going to look like with Trey Lance. And for that reason, I think this game is going to be a little bit closer than people think. Just because, we haven't seen him operate this offense for a full game. We haven't, we saw flashes good and bad from Trey Lance in the preseason. And I'm really curious to see what this is all going to look like when you put it together for a full game with that offense.
Yeah, no, very good point. 49ers did not actually take the lead there until the fourth quarter in last year's matchup, but ended up scoring 18 points in that final frame to kind of pull away there. And they became a much different team after that. So they weren't the same 49ers that we saw them at the end of the year. But I like that you mentioned there's not really a whole lot you can take because, the Bears are so new, right? New head coach, new GM. Really, this feels a lot like maybe Justin Fields' rookie season in some ways. What are you most curious about going into week 1? Of all this newness, you, the beat reporter, what are you going to be looking at closely this weekend?
For me, the big thing is got to be this offense. What is this going to look like? We saw a little bit of it in that third preseason game against Cleveland. They had some really good moments there, particularly with Justin Fields throwing the ball. He looked really good. Now any preseason game you got to take with a grain of salt. The Browns weren't playing some of their best defenders. When Myles Garrett isn't in there, that's obviously a huge. You put an asterisk next to that, but I want to see what this looks like. Luke Getsy's offense, and I'm really curious to see the ways that they can utilize Justin and can they get him moving outside the pocket a little bit? Can they move the pocket for him and take advantage of his strengths? And then just within that, the big thing I'm watching is this offensive line. Braxton Jones in particular, their rookie left tackle. You're talking about a 5th round pick out of Southern Utah who's got to go in there and go up against Nick Bosa. That is not an easy first assignment. And certainly there's no easy assignments in the NFL. All these guys are really good on the other side, but I'm watching Braxton Jones and Larry Borum, the second year right tackle as well. He got a fair amount of playing time last year, but he's still a young guy as well. And you got to see how these guys play against some really, really top competition.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think the offense is extremely fascinating, right? It seemed like maybe they were alluding to it in press conferences that they haven't really revealed everything that they have to offer, which makes sense, right? You were trying to keep it vanilla in the preseason, but I am curious about how this offense operates, right? It felt like they were doing a better job of getting the ball out of Justin Fields' hand a lot quicker. Like maybe he was focusing on the quick game. So if that's an element to this game, I would be very curious because it felt like maybe he was trying to look for the big play more consistently last year. So we did get a comment here from Mike Johnson over at the YouTube page. What do we know about San Fran's O-line? Did I hear there are injuries to some of the starters? This is probably a better question for you. Have you been focusing on the 49ers' latest injury report? Is there anything going on there?
Yeah, it looks like Daniel Brunskill, a guard for them, has been listed as out. He's got a hamstring injury. I happen to have this practice report right in front of me. That's the big one other than George Kittle. So that's something to keep an eye on. Other than that, I haven't taken a close look at that O-line at this point.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Injury is definitely something to monitor every week, every game week. That you're officially in game week when you're stressing out about injury reports.
Yeah, right.
Let's make the argument now for the Bears covering. I think the Bears cover. That is what I've written all week. I think they do cover the +7 here. What do you think are the keys to success for the Bears? If they're going to cover, if they're going to make this close, as you said earlier, what is the key to success for them on offense or defense?
Yeah, the offense has to look a little bit like it did in that third preseason game. You want to see them moving the ball. You don't want to revert back to what we saw earlier in the preseason when they weren't able to get first downs against the Chiefs, and they wound up with a field goal against the Seahawks, but it was a little bit tougher there those first couple of games. I think overlooked in all this is that they're also changing the scheme defensively. Matt Eberflus is bringing in his own scheme. I'm a little bit less worried about that side of the ball just because there are a couple of bigger names in Eddie Jackson and Robert Quinn, and you add some really promising rookies in there. I think that if they can get pressure on Trey Lance and if they can force him to do some things that he doesn't want to do, or get him out of the pocket a little bit and disrupt his timing. You're talking, I know he's not a rookie, but he's a young quarterback who hasn't had a whole lot of NFL playing experience. If Robert Quinn's in the backfield, that's going to be a really good thing for this Bears team.
Absolutely. Let's cut away from game one, week one here. We kind of mentioned it on the Bears Insider podcast earlier this morning. There was a lot of kind of big picture things talking about the Bears, but I want to highlight that here as well, especially focusing on the betting angle here. It's no secret, right? Expectations are kind of low. The national media narrative is saying the Bears could be one of the worst teams in the league. Now, we obviously know that teams surprise and disappoint every year, so take that with a grain of salt. But I wanted your opinion as someone who is, at the facility constantly and knows the team at this point and answers these similar questions, right? Justin Fields earlier this week was asked about maybe embracing the underdog role. What do you get the sense of maybe the vibe of the team as compared to maybe what the national media, what the narrative is outside of that facility?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this. I mean, being in the locker room and being around these guys a little bit this week, the vibe is positive, and there's really no reason for it not to be at this point. You've got a roster that looks completely different from what it did a year ago. They've got 15 rookies on this team right now. These are guys who weren't here last year. They don't have if there's any negative energy left from previous years or previous coaching staffs, whatever, it's not there. They've got a whole new team, a whole new set of guys. And a lot of these guys that they kept are young. Larry Borum, Justin Fields, those guys, they only had 1 year of experience to go off of. And there's reason for optimism right now. Now, certainly that can look different if we get to week 10 and they're 3-7, they're 4-6, whatever the case may be. But things are positive right now. And you look at the schedule, I think there's some winnable games on this schedule. They have reasons to be optimistic. Certainly they've put in a lot of work up to this point. And I think they're just ready to sort of showcase what they've been working on the last 8 months.
Yeah, I think it's easy at this stage, right, to feel maybe a little sensitive of what that maybe narrative is starting to build around this team. Like I mentioned, on your show, the Bears under win total at 6.5 is the most popular bet at most sports books, including BetMGM. So it is like there's a real narrative, and I can see why fans may be sensitive about that. But fast forward, we don't know what this year is going to be like. But fast forward to this time next year, I think people are going to be singing a different tune about the Bears. They're in a very good cap situation next year, and maybe they have an understanding of who their quarterback is and what this team is. And all of a sudden, in a blink, 1 year later, there's a much different narrative about this team going into next year. So I think that's important to keep in mind. That said, the win total is 6.5, pretty low, and Bears fans should embrace that, right? You, as someone who covers the team, what do you think would be considered a successful season for the Bears, knowing that maybe expectations are a little bit lower going into this year?
Yeah, I mean, anytime when I look at this team, I've been saying all summer, I feel like they're going to be right around that 6-win mark. I think they're going to wind up at 6-11. Anything over that, you start talking 7-8 wins. That is a really, that is something to feel good about if you're the Bears. I think if they can pull out that many wins, with this first year regime, with, like I mentioned before, 15 rookies, that is the most in the NFL. At least it was as of Monday. I know rosters do change a little bit here and there, but I counted up all the rookies across the league. The average is 8.3 on a 53-man roster, and the Bears have 15. If you're winning 7 games with a young team like that, that's something to build off of, and you can feel good about that. I wouldn't even necessarily feel all that bad with a 6-11 team. I mean, that's once you're getting below that, then you're starting to feel like you're stuck in the mud a little bit. And I think there's winnable games if you look at this schedule. The Texans, the Giants, the Commanders, the Falcons, the Jets. Those are 5 big ones outside of the division games where you look at that and you say those are pretty much toss-ups. Those are the games that you circle and say those are winnable. And if let's say they split with the Lions and the Vikings, you add those 5 games in there, that's 7 right there. But you're certainly not going to win every single one of those games. We know how the NFL is. It's wacky at times. You're going to beat somebody that you probably shouldn't, and you're also going to probably lose to somebody that you shouldn't. So I'm not necessarily saying they're going to win all 5 of those games, but that's kind of why I'm feeling like 6 wins is a good range.
Which doesn't put you near the number 1 overall pick. So, worst case scenario there is not feasible in your prediction there. I think your answer is way more important, but to me, how this season is determined success is really just figuring out if Justin Fields is the guy, right? Like he showed flashes as a rookie. But if you have a better understanding that, hey, Justin Fields is the guy that we can build around after this year, I mean, that's really all this year is about. Especially, you mentioned the young roster, maybe the talent is not quite there, but it might not matter if Justin Fields is good. So you think back to the Ravens last year, they had a bunch of injuries. Lamar, who is incredibly good, he is clearly the franchise guy, led them to an 8-3 start, number 1 in the AFC before he went down with an injury. So great quarterbacks, while situations are helpful and beneficial, can really overcome those kind of things. So if Justin Fields is the guy, you're going to be able to tell that, I think, at some point this year.
Yeah, I think this year is all about the vibe. What's the vibe you're getting from the quarterback? That's obviously the most important one. But then, what's the vibe you're getting from Braxton Jones at left tackle? If he can be an answer moving forward, that's going to solve a lot of problems. That's going to be a position that you don't need to emphasize in the draft next year. What about your rookie defensive backs? If Kyler Gordon, if Jaquan Brisker are the answer at their positions, that's going to be huge for this defense moving forward. So yeah, it's less about the wins and losses and more about the vibe and the feel of where this thing's heading.
I will put you on the spot though for the wins and losses. What is your official season record prediction for this year?
Yeah, I've been saying it all summer and I'm going to stick with it. I got them at 6-11.
I think that's completely fair. I mean, it's right around what the betting line is, around 6.5. I think that's completely fair. If they got to 7 wins, you'd feel a lot more optimistic about this team, and for good reason. Let's close this out with your prediction. I think I've gotten an understanding of where you're leaning at this point. And actually, I think I got your score prediction on the last podcast, so we might be the same again. So what is your official game prediction per this podcast at the Best Chicago Sports Podcast?
Yeah, I got the 49ers 21-17. Hopefully I'm not contradicting myself from earlier today. But I think this game's going to be a little bit closer. The Bears got the home field advantage. There's some question marks with Trey Lance, and certainly if George Kittle is not available, that's another question mark with that offense. I think this is going to be a little bit closer than people think.
That would be interesting for a week 1 matchup. I think I made it 23-17 in the end, so right in line with what you thought. Probably a low-scoring game, would lean the under and the Bears on the spread. Thank you so much, Sean Hammond, for joining and talking all things Bears and providing a bunch of insight. This was great to have you, man. Yeah,
thanks for having me, Shane. Anytime.
Yeah, go take care, man.
All righty.
Bye. That was Sean Hammond, our Bears beat reporter for the Shaw Local News Network. Great stuff. We'll show a comment there at the end that I wasn't able to get to from Logan Bannister. I appreciate the insight on the locker room. I did too. Unfortunately, I have San Francisco -7 as my lock of the week. Not optimistic about the Bears. Well, Logan, I think you're going to get San Francisco -6.5 at some point this week. So if you wait till Sunday, that is probably what it's going to be. And that's a really good transition there. I think it's time to close out maybe with some week 1 picks. I thought we were going to talk about Thursday Night Football, but essentially the Bills kind of beat up on the Rams 31-10. Not much to take away from it. Caesar Sportsbook did adjust the Super Bowl odds. I wrote about it at Bet Chicago Sports, which again, you can find at shawlocal.com/bet. And it was kind of interesting. The Bills moved up a little bit from +600 to +550. The Rams, meanwhile, went from +1100 to +1400 after just 1 game of the NFL season. The Rams, for comparison, were not much longer than plus 1,200 last year to win the Super Bowl when they eventually did win the Super Bowl. But I think as we saw last night, and I mentioned in yesterday's show, the Rams, there's a lot of concerns. Maybe bad vibes was the way I used to describe it going into the season. But essentially, I mean, the offensive line kind of banged up. Matthew Stafford helps not quite 100%, or it doesn't feel like that. And honestly, if Allen Robinson doesn't provide a number 2 option opposite of Cooper Kupp, it could turn bad pretty quickly. The Rams play actually the top 8 teams in Super Bowl odds on their schedule, not including themselves as well, obviously. But it's not an easy schedule. They will bounce back with the Falcons next week, but they have a tough slate, and so I wouldn't be surprised if they start stacking up some losses. NFC's pretty weak, and so maybe you can get in even with a poor record. But I would not put them in the driver's seat to win their division at this point. Let's close this out again, like I mentioned, with picks. I am on the Bears plus 7. I wrote about it earlier in the week. I was waiting around for plus 7.5. Didn't get there. And with the news of George Kittle, it felt like he was trending in a different direction. This game last year was Bears plus 4.5. I make this game this year Bears plus 5.5. I just think, I don't know. Trey Lance and the 49ers are going to be good. They're going to be a contender in the NFC. But for now, I think there might be an adjustment period. And I wouldn't be surprised. The weather gets out there. It's kind of a sloppy, ugly game. And, as our score predictions alluded to, a lot of points being hard to come by. So 21-17, 23-17, both those final scores would cover the number. So if you're wanting Bears plus 7, I think you kind of jump on it, before the weekend. If you're on the 49ers side, I think you're going to get a better number before kickoff. I am also on the Cardinals plus 6. Wrote about that over at shawlocal.com/bet. Not feeling as confident about that one, I'll be honest. When I wrote about it, it moved from minus 3.5, Chiefs minus 3.5, to all the way to Chiefs minus 6. And really the premise of it was a release show, release the pick. A bunch of people bet that pick, and therefore the number moved a lot in the Cardinals' favor. And I made the number about Cardinals plus 3.5. And so I thought it was enough of a value that I took it. And then the injuries have happened. Their injury report is pretty loaded at this point at the end of the week. And so that makes me a little bit concerned. And honestly, anytime you're betting against the Chiefs, it is somewhat concerning because they can be up 21 at some point. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe an adjustment period for the Chiefs. They got a lot of new faces in that receiver room. Maybe things are a little bit more difficult to move the ball at times. And honestly, the Cardinals, Kyler Murray has typically been really good early in the season. So maybe they get a toe-to-toe with them from a points perspective. And this ends up becoming a shootout. And therefore, eventually you'd want to be on the Patrick Mahomes side in a shootout. But I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being somewhat of a competitive game. And maybe the Chiefs don't show all their best stuff because, 4 days after that, they're playing the Chargers on Thursday Night Football. And, that would seem like a more important game for them because they can probably get away with a win with their B+ effort here. Bets I'm considering, which I wrote about as well in that same article. I've been eyeing the Steelers plus 6.5 against Cincinnati all week. I've mentioned it before. Underdogs last year in week 1 went 12-4 against the spread, 9 outright upsets. Week 1 gets weird. Like there's a lot of weird things that can happen. We spent all summer saying this is what our expectations of these teams are going to be. And then all chaos breaks loose. And so I don't know. The reason why I haven't fired on it is because you have to convince yourself to put money on Mitch Trubisky. And maybe that's not always the most appealing thing to do. But the Steelers defense obviously has seen this Cincinnati offense a couple times recently. And so if there is going to be a team that quote unquote comes up with a better plan to, slow down this attack, you would feel like it's them, especially with their talent up front. Cincinnati's offensive line, not a lot of continuity there in the preseason. Didn't get a lot of reps. Joe Burrow obviously didn't get reps. And so it wouldn't really be shocking if this ended up being more competitive than we thought it would be going into the year. And honestly, the Steelers outright upset the Buffalo Bills in week 1 of last year. So anytime you get Mike Tomlin as an underdog, it's hard not to take it. I will probably end up on Steelers plus 6.5, but the reason why I haven't been is because It is convincing myself to bet on Mitch Trubisky, which feels a little bit gross. The last bet, spread-wise, that I am considering is the Commanders. Washington Commanders -2.5 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mentioned on the last show, I'm pretty high on the Jaguars going in. I think they could be maybe the surprise team every year. 17 of the last 19 years, a team has gone from worst to first in their division. I feel like the Ravens are the obvious choice to continue that trend, but I feel like the Jaguars could be the next best selection for that trend to continue. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot to like about this team. Doug Peterson has to be better than Urban Meyer. Just has to be. Trevor Lawrence in a position to take a leap in year 2. The thing that the reason why I'm leaning towards the Commanders is I think they are the better team. Carson Wentz, not the best quarterback, obviously, but an upgrade from what they got last year. And you remember this time last year, the Commanders were kind of the trendy sleeper hype team of the summer. They were, I think, the favorite to win the NFC East, or at least a lot of people's pick to win the NFC East because they just had that, Heineke wild card matchup against the Bucs the year before. And then really, injuries took a turn for the worse for the team. And obviously they had to play Heineke a lot last year. And so it ended up not being the year they expected going in. And I think a lot of people probably saw it coming, a lot of smarter people, but they were kind of a hype team and therefore maybe a post-hype sleeper in the sense that, hey, the NFC East is weak. No one's really talking about the Commanders. Maybe they can at least make it competitive because we know that division is going to come down to the final week. And we know that the Cowboys can't win it because back-to-back champion has not won since like 2002 in that division. So, it wouldn't surprise me if the Commanders are in the mix in that division. And therefore, I don't know. It's gotten past the key number of 3. And therefore, I think -2.5 is worth a look if you're thinking about the Commanders. That's going to do it for the second edition of the Bet Chicago Sports podcast. Thank you so much to Sean Hammond, our Bears beat reporter, for joining us. I will try to make that more of a regular thing, get that Bears insight on the Friday show, and essentially decide how we're going to bet this game. But for me, I decided a long time ago, it's Bears +7. I lean towards under. Hopefully you got it at a better number earlier in the week because right now it's probably not good enough. But that's how I would be betting this game if I and that's how I am betting this game. So again, thanks again for Sean. I am Shane Jackson, and make sure you take advantage of the Caesar Sportsbook code there in the bottom right corner if you're watching this at a later time. See you next time.